Thank you all for coming to yet another Digital Ag seminar series here at Purdue. Today we have a panel. I just wanted to remind you with this visual, there's one remaining seminar still to come. It's hosted by the Institute of Plant Sciences. So we hope to see you one more time on April 18th. So without further ado, our panel today, Jarrod will take my place here in a minute. We have Jarrod Doucette from our Ag Data Services here at Purdue. Rachel Stevens, who manages the ACRE, the Agronomy Center for Research and Education Farm. It's a research and production unit. And then Alex Helms oversees all of the Purdue Ag Centers. I think we have 8 of them scattered around the state. So their topic really is how do we deal with data in research farm settings to facilitate the innovation, to facilitate the technological change that we want to see in agriculture. So essentially, Jarrod, please join us. He will essentially moderate and keep this thing going, and we will have time for a little bit of Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Dennis.
I do not.
Well, Dennis, thanks for being pushing extra. I told you in charge of I think I did it. We can edit this later, right?
A side button does that. Sorry.
Yeah, I
didn't mention.
really do not.
Here.
Yeah. We're going down in the slide deck.
Okay.
There you go.
Here we go.
Yeah, so Dennis, thanks for inviting us here today. My name's Jarrod Doucette. I'm the director of the College of Agriculture's Data Services team, and it's great to see some of those folks in the back of the room there. Alex?
Yeah, so I'm Alex Helms. I'm the assistant director of the Purdue Ag Centers. I've been in this role for about a year now. And prior to my current role, I worked at the Southeast Purdue Ag Center since about 2017. So I worked a lot with the data and the researchers there at CPAC for a while before this role.
And I'm Rachel Stevens. I'm the farm manager at ACRE, the Agronomy Center for Research and Education, and I've been there about 3 years.
So, like I said, I was from the Purdue Ag Center. So there are 8 remote Purdue research farms that are sort of based off campus across the state of Indiana. So we're a little bit different. Like Rachel is a departmental farm. We're sort of like a College of Ag farm. So we don't necessarily have like row crop only or forestry. Not that, she'll tell you more, but we have some farms that might specialize in livestock production, some that specialize maybe in like horticultural production, some that maybe specialize in forestry and wildlife. But all 8 of those farms sort of kind of work together, but have like a diverse amount of data that, each ag center might produce and have to manage and deal with on a, daily or yearly basis.
Yeah, and ACRE, like Alex mentioned, is one of the departmental farms. So there's a couple departmental farms. And I'll say, we have a similar mission across the PACs and across ACRE and ASREC and, all of these research operations. And we do a lot of collaborative work, just a few differences in operation and management of them. But we've thrown some combined stats for the PACs and ACRE up here. So, between all these locations, ACRE and the 8 PAC locations, we have over 450 different research projects that are going on a year. Over 100 different faculty are utilizing these locations for their research. We're supporting research for over 50 grad students usually a year. And we have something like 11 or 12 different departments who are doing work out at these locations. Farm sizes range from some of the smaller PACs are about 200 acres up to 2,000 acres. So kind of a large range in field scale, research scale, intensity and type of research, depending on location. So as you can see, it's kind of a diverse landscape that we're dealing with when we're talking about this data and, kind of the framework that each property is operating under.
And with that a little bit too, like, we may have a farm with a lot of like small plot research that has a lot of research projects, But then we also might have farms or trials that are larger scale and maybe like less data sets, but like really intense data samples. So you might have a yield map with a data point every 3 seconds, which would be one yield map, but very intense data within that. So
We got some good examples of that too, right?
So as we kind of sat down to talk about how we wanted to talk about, data on the farms, Alex and I quickly realized that we kind of have a lot of overlap in what we were going to be talking about. So we've kind of structured this presentation in such a way that we're going to hopefully give some examples, give some case studies of some of our shared challenges, and then Jarrod will chime in with some hopefully ways we can improve and grow and get better. But to start out, kind of from a farm standpoint, this is more from a management standpoint. So this is things that Alex and I and the other farm superintendents are dealing with. Some of the challenges that we have with data. And the first is time. So who is maintaining and organizing and distributing this data? This is something that is both a part of our job, yet we also do not have the time to devote to aggregating and organizing and distributing this data in the way that we would like to. So I'll let you go on to.
yeah, so some of the data you kind of need like background information to go with it too, like to be really useful or really knowledgeable about that data set. So it might, require that contextual knowledge that goes with it, that maybe like the superintendent or the farm workers might have that, as just a data set, you might not understand there's other things that come with it. And then there's a lot of quality control that may or may not happen as that data is collected, right? And I guess I'll kind of get into the case study a little bit about the quality control. So
Thanks. So I would wager $100 that if we asked everyone to write their definition of data right now, no two would match, right? Who in this room, when we're talking about data today, thinks that we're talking about digital data? No, I think was kind of my assumption. Or there's anybody else? I mean, we pretty much all work with digital data, right? So that is going to be the main focus today. We'll talk a little bit about some attempts we made at digitizing some older data. But, to kind of put into some context the challenges of working with this data, we need different ways to describe it. And so I really like the fair data framework. It's good for humans and it's good for machines. And as we get these bigger, more complex data sets, kind of have to use computers. You can't look at a piece of paper with a table and calculate your own statistics on paper, right? And so there's 4 components to the fair data principles, and these are kind of my simplifications that I've come up with over time. So in terms of findable, it's that those interested in the data can locate it. Accessible is the data is retrievable and only by those that are intended to use it, right? So that comes in with security and things like that. It gets into some of the usage rights that we'll briefly touch a bit. Interoperable, right? It's not just, is it an open file format, right? It's also, does that data set work with another data set? So does your planting data, can you correlate that, integrate that with your harvest data? And then finally, reusable, and that's where things often get tough, right? So it's data high quality, high integrity, what are the usage rights? And so these are kind of the 4 pieces that we've broken things up today to kind of make it manageable and help relate these different things. And then at the end, I'll talk about a bit of a case study we did looking at digitizing some of the historic paper files, and then suggest like a really high level framework for how we can make some progress on some of the areas, some of the really high value, high quality.
all right, so yeah, the next slides are pretty much me and Rachel complaining about why it's so hard to, manage this and stuff. But so the first part of fair is findable, right? F. So, I guess I'm just, part of this is I'm just going to kind of use an example of if this data was findable, this is how somebody could have used it, but likely people don't know it exists. So, for a soil fertility specialist who was doing, say, research with potassium fertilizer, they might have a trial with like different rates of potassium fertilizer, and then, they could track their potassium inputs, their potassium outputs from the yield nutrient removal. And then, part of their conclusions from their publication or their finding is that, we found that it took 8 pounds of K2O per acre to change the soil test by 1, right? But likely the only thing they're basing that off of is their own data set, their trial that maybe they had control over. But, across the ag centers and ACRE and probably the other research farms at Purdue, soil testing is something we sort of do on a normal basis. And we, that's, digital data that we have that we store on our local computers maybe, but it's not really, findable to all the researchers. But if they knew we had this, for example, on this F10, a 35-acre field, if we sample it on a half-acre basis, which we mostly did, we would have almost 70 data points, along with the other data sets that we have with our yield monitor and our fertilizing application maps. We sort of know the potassium inputs. We can calculate our potassium outputs, and we can come up with it and chart the data and find that, well, okay, it took us in this field about 9 pounds of K2O per acre to change the soil test by 1. That would be a reasonable, validation of that particular researcher's data on a broader data set than just maybe that one trial. There's a lot of concentration on like soil organic matter, right? And how carbon credits will affect agriculture. And, researchers might be interested in how cover crops and manure will affect, soil organic matter changes over time. So they might initiate a study, but these kind of things take very long time to change, right? Maybe decades. Some of our ag centers have, really good field records that would, tell us if it had cover crops or manure and how much. And, particularly this one example of CPAC, we've had fields that had manure and cover crop for, well over a decade. And other fields that had no cover crop and no manure, just synthetic fertilizers for that same amount of time. And again, it may not be a specific research project using that data, but a researcher might be able to like draw some conclusions or develop a hypothesis based on, real information that is just collected at the farms on an annual basis by soil testing.
So right now, like people would maybe call you up or, you come to campus and talk to people and, through conversations, you're like, oh, we have this data that might be useful to you,
Sure.
to you, that kind of thing. And
yeah, and like maybe the researchers who are working at the farms know it exists to some extent. Or, at the new faculty, they might find out when they first come that this data exists, but that's also at the same time where they're also learning a bunch of other things. So if they don't follow up with that, it sort of gets lost, along the way. So, there's an opportunity, and this is just soil data. We would have, genetic data for a lot of our livestock farms with, lambs and cows. And there's just a large amount of data set that I think a lot of people just don't even know exists.
yeah, so that makes sense. It's worked for a long, the packs of, how old's the oldest research property?
1917 or something.
Yeah, so they've been around a long time and, that makes sense. Do you think that works pretty well, or have you seen some like examples of where, oh, if they had, known about this, they would have done something differently, or, they could have done some really cool research if they had been able to include this data?
Well, yeah, there are times where, yeah, researchers like come up with ideas and they want to maybe conduct it at an ag center. And, we've already done it before and, we have the data or we could show them that. You know, but they've already wrote the grant to do it, so now they have to do it again, even though, you know, we could, you know, and it could change over time. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it, but, you know, they probably could have taken it a step further if they would have known that we already have done this, and, you know, these were the results, and they could have maybe went in a different direction in some scenarios.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about making data accessible. So for those of you who do work at ACRE, you are probably very familiar with this book. This is historically where we have kept all of what we typically refer to as kind of like our metadata records for the farm. So anything that we are not collecting, well, and things that we are also collecting a spatial record for, we're still going to this book and we're writing down something like May 2nd, Aaron planted beans, and these are grouped by fields, population 140,000, and then whatever variety that was. So we have these line by line records for each of our fields going back decades and decades for every single field. And that's historically how we have kept this record. So anytime a researcher is like, okay, I need to know some history for this field, they either come and they take a picture of the book, or I send them pictures of the book or things like that for them to get this data record. And Jarrod will talk later about some attempts to digitize some similar type data. But our first step that we wanted to take with this was making this data more accessible to researchers. And for me, that was saying, okay, we have to stop writing it down in an analog format where I have access to a binder and everyone else either has to come to me or I have to text them a picture or scan something or email something to them. So if you want to, we have moved to recording all of that same data in Airtable. So you can see on the left, that form there is the form that myself and my team uses to record data in the field. So we are able to do this on our phone. That's a screenshot of what it looks like when we pull it up on our phone. And essentially field by field, we're able to, you know, we select the date, we select who's doing the operation, we select where we're at, and then what we're doing. And based on that we have conditional formatting set up to then populate or bring up a lot of other follow-up questions. So if it's fertilizing, it's going to ask us, what products are you using? What rate are you using? Things like that. But what that's allowed us to do is move away from, you know, that handwritten record, and we now have everything in this tabular format that if a researcher asks me, I want to know what happened in field 57 for the last 3 years, I can either one, give them access to this database, or to just copy this data over, send it in an Excel file to them, and then they have all those records, probably more info than they wanted to know of what went on in that field. So for us, this has been a really big step forward in making stuff much more easily accessible for researchers. This takes a lot less time. And for those who are doing more work that is kind of overarching across multiple fields, by giving them access to this database, they're able to just pull this data, use this data without me having to go through and text them, you know, could be hundreds of pictures out of the book to get them the information that they need. One other thing that we have been able to do, I think, yes, is take this a step further. So as my team and I are recording data in the field, that data, this is particularly in the context of spray application. So anytime we're applying a pesticide or herbicide in the field, the guys finish the field, record that data in that app. It goes to Airtable, where it then calculates what that REI or that reentry interval is for that field. So this is data that we have to report and have publicly available for our staff and faculty and students so that they know whether it's safe for them to enter a field or not. So all of these fields will have a posted interval after we spray it. It could be 12 hours, 24, 48 hours, that they're not allowed to re-enter this field. So now all of this data is accessible on our ACRE website for if someone said, oh, I wanted to go do field work today. I know the farm said that they were going to be spraying. They can pull up and see, oh, yep, field 57 was sprayed. Re-entry is 24 hours, and that timestamp says I can't enter until tomorrow at noon. And so that is been a huge win for us, and I think a really important safety aspect for our researchers. That this is not something that I am posting on a bulletin board where they have to go and actually, look at with their eyes. They can pull it up on their phone. They can look at it before they even head out to the farm. And it's been, I think, a really useful and important safety tool for us to make sure that people are operating in a safe manner.
And I think that's a really good example of how, it's the relationship between the work that you all do out there and the research that happens on campus, and how, these different aspects of the data and the accessibility in particular benefit both the operations that go on out at the farm and also the research that's done out there on campus and everywhere. So.
Okay, yes, I'm up again. Interoperable. I don't have a great win story like I did on the last one of look what we did with this data to make it better for our research community. This is a slide I compiled of programs or data sources that between the PACS and ACRE that we use that all have different formats. So you can see we have quite a mess here of all these different proprietary sources of data where we have or software where we have data stored, things like that. This is just really to say this is not an easy task for us to overcome. We've got weather data, we have field data, we have that metadata, we have marketing data, we have our drone data, we have, we've got all these different data sources in different formats, things stored in different areas. They're little different buckets and different silos of data. And then if you go on one more slide, this is just an example of across, when we're talking specifically about spatial data, all the different proprietary formats that our spatial data can be coming in as. So this is a screenshot of if you were to upload data into Ag Leader SMS, which is a software program that both the PACS and ACRE use for storing and managing our data, our spatial data, largely yield data, planting data, things like that. That you can have all these different sources or company and file formats, and then even within a single company. So here on the right, Ag Leader is highlighted. Those are all different formats of data coming from one single company. So, we have this massive challenge of our data does not talk well. And that's just simply with spatial data. So this is something that, I don't know that I have a really good conclusion for this other than to say, this is a large obstacle that we are facing, that we are trying to figure out what is the best way to move forward in dealing with the disparities of these different types of data, and how do we do a better job of making sure that we have some continuity of data, especially when we have systems that retire. So, as we get older formats of data or older equipment or older yield file formats, if those don't get upgraded from system to system, we start losing some of that data. We lose our ability to utilize that data. So,
yeah. And I think digital ag data is collected digitally. So you think, okay, I get it, I'm good, right? Whereas if we said, hey, I want some harvest and, fertilization data from the all the 1950s, you'd be like, okay, that's going to take some work to find it and get it into a digital, format that I can work with it, right? If it's a piece of paper, it's going to be tough. I think a lot of times we just assume that if it's digital, we're good. But we're not. There's really a lot of work that has to happen with the data that comes out of these, the farm equipment and the different sources to actually make it useful. And again, that ties into some of the things we're going to talk about later.
So the R part of fair data is reusable, and I'll try to talk about it in a sense of like quality control of like what's the quality of that data. So this is data, right? It's 183 bushel per acre, 180 pounds per acre nitrogen was put on. That's data, right? How was that yield data collected? Was it a yield monitor, or did the person writing it down say we took 4 loads of corn off from the field and that makes 183 bushel per acre. You know, so just because, you know, there's a yield number doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate, right? You know, you hope, especially from the research farm, that, you know, the quality that's going into it is good, but, you know, that's an obvious example. There's less obvious examples that are more challenging. For example, if you were to access the precision yield map for the same field, you know, you'll notice these little red dots at the beginning or the little really dark green at the end of each pass, right? So does that mean that there was no corn going into the harvester at that spot? Or does it mean there was a bunch at the end? Well, probably not. It probably just means it took some time for the combine to harvest it and then that corn make it to the sensor, right? Is the person who's reusing this information, do they understand that and do they know about that? Or, you know, is there enough other information with that map or data set to explain that to them? You know, same thing with the map on the right, the nitrogen application rate map. Do all them little red bars mean that there was a lower nitrogen rate applied there? Or does it just mean that, like, the sensor maybe, you know, it took a second for the sensor to catch up that it was reading that it was putting on? And also that sensor is probably just reading a shaft turning. Doesn't mean there was any nitrogen in the tank that it was actually putting it on. You know, so, you know, do we know that it was more than just a shaft turning and that there was actually 190 pounds of nitrogen being applied? This is an example that Rachel had. This is the same yield map from the same harvest, same combine, but they're two different maps, right? Well, which one is, yeah, which one is right? Is the one on the left right, or is the one on the right correct? You know, one map had, you know, it is more of the raw data straight from the combine yield monitor, and the other one had some post-processing occurring that, you know, Rachel had done to make it how she felt was more characteristic of the field, correct? And, you know, here's an example of maybe some of that post-processing that would occur. That top left map is where, you know, the combine on the end rows were harvested. And then when the combine was going on the back and forth rows, when it would turn around, the data logger didn't stop. It kept logging data as 0 points as it was turning around. You know, that's an obvious fix, right? But maybe somebody who's not super familiar with agricultural data might not understand what's occurring. And then the process of cleaning that yield could be different from person to person. So how Rachel might clean yield with a program versus how somebody without like a standard way of cleaning the yield data, and you might have two different yield maps for the same exact field and same exact harvester. And then the images on the right are just like an example of like the difference that can happen when, you know, based on a clean yield map versus unclean yield map. So the top right, you know, it thought that there was very low yield because that harvester wasn't collecting any yield data in any harvestable corn in those areas. Where on the bottom left map it was. So you have two very different results from the same combine. So you know, the quality of data is very important, and you know, the quality of the data might also depend on what the researcher wants to use it for as well. For example, I talked a little bit about, like, did you know if the yield monitor was calibrated before harvesting it? Well, if your only interest is this strip higher yield than that strip, then maybe it doesn't have to be dialed into the nearest bushel per acre. Like, you know, that strip is higher than that strip. That's all we needed to know. But if a researcher is wanting to track, say, how much nutrients left the field, well, you know, the amount of potassium or phosphorus or nitrogen that's in 200 bushel corn could be vastly different than 300 bushel corn. So does the person who's going to access that yield map or yield data, do they understand if it was calibrated or not? So there's a lot of, you know, quality control that, you know, can be important, some of this data.
It's really cool to, oh, you go first.
I was just gonna say, some of it, as Alex and I were kind of talking through some of these challenges, it's interesting how much of it has some amount of subjectivity to it. You know, we compared our methods for how Alex cleans yield versus how I clean yield. And I'm not going to say either is right or wrong, because we both have, you know, our methodology of why we are doing the steps that we are doing. But, you know, between those two, if Alex was to submit his clean yield file and I was to submit mine, you know, which are we saying is the appropriate? Maybe they're both appropriate. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of those challenges that I don't necessarily think there should be a standardized method for this. But you know, there is an amount of subjectivity as we're dealing with this type of data that comes into play.
And like one of the cool things that I've learned after working with Alex and Rachel for a few years now, is how, you know, this is kind of part of the research process, and what, you know, you just described kind of sounds like methods to me, you know, of creating research data. And so I think that's one of the ways of looking at that and providing some kind of context of why these things are important. Yeah. All right. So we talked about a lot of different things, a lot of challenges, subjectivity, which nobody ever wants to hear, you know, with
Sorry.
quantitative data. You know, and it's pretty overwhelming. You know, we're talking about a farm that's run by a department, and then, you know, farms that are run kind of by the college in many similar ways, but not all the same, different machinery on them, different staff doing things, and, you know, been around a long time. And things are ever evolving, right? You know, how long ago was, you know, digital? I think digital ag has been you know, it's probably been around for 30, 40, 50 years. But just more and more, it's just kind of become the standard. And digital data doesn't necessarily mean it's any of these things: findable, accessible, you know, useful. So what I'm proposing here is that we break it down into pieces that we can actually talk more precisely about. And so that means, instead of saying, you know, the research property data, we look at data sets on those farms. Instead of looking at making it work for everybody, even in this room, right? Let's make it work first for the, you know, the people out there collecting the data and the research project it's collected. Right? That's a good kind of small group. And then breaking down the, you know, the whole conceptual FAIR model into those pieces like we did earlier. Yeah, when I do that. So, you know, what do I mean by data set? Just to kind of keep it simple, it's, you know, data that was collected with the same protocols, had the same processing applied to it, which means basically it has kind of the same metadata. Everyone to me, right? So like there's one person out there, you know, driving the harvester that's collecting the data, and maybe they come back in and somebody does, you know, does part of it, but let's just assume it's one person, right? Like it's got to work for them first, right? And then, you know, maybe everybody that drives that same harvester, right, on the farm at different times, we're going to pretend there's lots of people out there and lots of harvesters. You know, then let's like do the same thing on that research property, and then let's do the same thing across, you know, the department and the college properties, and then the college, right? And so kind of scale up as you go. But you've got to start with, you know, a good base that works for you. And so the piece here I want to talk about is Alex, I think, came to me probably, I don't know.
Probably 4 years.
4 years ago. Like, we got all these papers and file cabinets, you know. We need to get them, like, you know, get them out to everybody, and everybody can use them. And so, of course, we need to scan them. And Alex and your undergrad spent countless hours next to the copy machine. It's okay if it's okay if you can't necessarily see what this means, because you can't read every little piece of it. I hope you can read a little bit of it. But even I can't read the you know, the handwriting in some cases, right? And so even if even if you have it in hand, sometimes things are not necessarily clear. And if you look at the map, you really have to understand the logic of how, you know, how things relate. Luckily, there's a an arrow there on the bottom right side of it that, you know, shows this goes to that. But it, you know, that's good. You're good. The piece to that though is, you know, it's digital now, so there's at least another copy of the paper, right? At a minimum, right? We've got that and we can kind of go from there. And so I took on the far left side there, you can kind of see the document, and then on the far, you know, on the bottom left side, that's the map really small, just to give you an idea of where I pulled these middle pieces from. And so we did some with optical character recognition on this data, somewhere around 50% technically successful, but even that's not super useful. It does a really good job when, you know, it's typed text, and it does a decent job of picking up things like the southeast at the top of the, is there, try to,
Yeah.
oh. All right, so southeast is right there. And it, you know, picked that up pretty well. They actually kind of read like down the page. And so if you scan your page in crooked, sometimes you can get things from one line hopping up to the next line and things like that. But just in general, you know, nice handwriting, typed text, nicely aligned, you're good. There we go. If you look here at the yellow highlighted pieces, those are the items. So there's a fertilizer, weed control, and then you've got who supplied it, whether it was the pack or the professor who applied it, pack or professor, and then you've got some notes. Well, if you look at what came out of the system, this is all we had. So that whole piece in the middle in red doesn't even show up at all. And even if those check marks did show up, you would lose the context of, you know, was it supplied by, applied by the faculty or the pack, right? So, you know, you think you can just have AI do everything for you. I mean, I think we've all experienced bad examples of that already. But this is another case in point, like you can't just feed, you know, garbage in, garbage out. Let's keep it that simple. And then this one over here, that's kind of the map that we saw on the first page. And then I pulled out a middle section. And so what you see here is, it did really good at this 1983 right here in the green. Pick that up. It added a heart in, which I think is the, like, I think it's the arrow from the line goes up here. It completely, like, this makes no, like, I don't even know what that means. And there's symbols that I've never seen in there. It often wrote COM instead of corn because the R going into the N looked like an M. So yeah, just beware. This is...
And the reason like we wanted to do this is like for one example, like you know, at the Ag Centers, you might have turnover, right? Like Rachel was new after Jim, and like there was a whole lot of stuff that like happened that Rachel would never know about unless she like flipped through. So like in same way as CPAC, I mean, anything before 2017, I wouldn't have necessarily known had occurred. So like, you know, I wanted to be able to like search in a search bar, like, you know, sulfur fertilizer, and then like be able to, you know, it would recognize all the research project that had, you know, anything associated with sulfur. And then I could like look at that and I could see who the researcher was. And then maybe I could like ask them about it or something. But, you know, that was sort of the purpose of it, right? You know,
we had grand ideas.
Yeah, we were just doing it for fun.
Yeah. The one thing that I think we did come out of that with was a pretty solid file naming convention. And so at least, you know, if you know the property, the field, the general, you know, was it harvest or planting or, you know, some type of spraying. And then, you know, either it was for, you know, these are PDFs, they came out, like if you scan a whole year, came out as one PDF file. We looked into breaking those up, but everything is manual, it takes time. And so what we did is we set some standards for the file names. And then since they're PDFs, we also use the metadata there to add some extra information because we can't have like, you know, 20 different words in the file name, but there was some other good stuff that we could capture. And that's a manual process. Mistakes happen, And so what we did was we had an approved list of like tags and approved list of file name components, and they needed to be in a certain order. And so once Alex and your assistants there were done getting the data digitized, we were able to run it through a QC script to at least make sure that stuff was correct. Right, so that we don't have weird abandoned files that we're missing, because my big concern with that, the page before is if somebody goes in searching for corn and everything's spelled COM, like they're gonna miss all this, I'll say information that's, I won't call it data, all this information that's out there. So what we're really trying to do is make sure we can get people as close to what they're looking for as possible without missing out on anything. All right, I thought there was a slide short there. We kind of already talked about breaking fair up the fair, but this was the idea from a few slides ago about breaking everything up. So I'll turn it over to the. Do you want me to, Rachel, you look
Sure,
ready.
sure. So in talking about this, we were trying to, if we were to do something next, what would we do? And I don't know that we have a super clear answer, but one was to this concept of starting small. We're not viewing this as a whole giant, we have to revolutionize all of our data, but thinking on a data set basis, like let's start with specific data sets and see what we can do to make improvements. So starting small, and thinking, how can we maximize this with a minimal input effort on our part? Do you want to do fair? You are, yeah.
Like the catalog, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, when I first started working with Jarrod, like, again, like I had this like grand vision of this like huge thing where like everybody puts in their information and like, because, researchers are worst people ever about giving us data, right? Like there's tons of tissue samples out there that I've never seen, So that was like this whole plan to like be able to see their stuff too. But every time we like, tried to get somewhere, I mean, it's just like, it's too much, right? So like, again, you got to start small. So like, kind of like a start is maybe just like, start cataloging the information that we do collect in a way where like, we already have like these research request forms that get documented every year of like all the projects that happen at the PACs. Maybe we just start, also writing down like, all right, well, we have, precision harvest data, we will have precision application, or it's hand harvest, or the researcher has it.
We have
Just
soil sampling and this year.
So,
we have weather data for just a
catalog.
comprehensive list.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is to, you notice we only have F and I in there. Because accessible, or I think that's the one, maybe it's reusable. Reusable includes usage rights. And that gets really tricky real quick, right? But at least if we can find it, in an organized digital way, then we can still let the people that created the data, own the data, deal with that. And if we get some, open data, folks want to provide data, that'll be pretty easy. But just not knowing what's out there, that takes care of that. And then the interoperable piece, I mean, there's data that's going to be stuck in system, different applications, different software, SMS, whatever it is, and so 10 years from now, we're going to have to go find a Windows 10 with the SMS version 4.7, like we got to get it out and do it, thoughtfully. There might be some things we can't do perfect, but certainly keeping track of what we did to get it out. I would say manipulate it as little as possible, so we don't have to have a lot of like process description and things like that. But that's why we kind of focused on those two things. And since we have you all in the room, we thought, at the beginning, Rachel and Alex talked about, the challenges from their perspective. And so thought we'd kind of turn the rest of this over to challenges from your perspective, but maybe first we start with questions specific to this, and then Dennis will. So who has, bet there's somebody out there who's not looking.
I had a question with when Rachel was talking about basically with so many different systems out there and things become antiquated.
Mhm.
I always worry about not being able to get back to
Yeah.
data sets. And it makes it hard to move forward, to move away from paper. So how do you go about trying to keep data in an accessible form 20 years from
And
now?
let everyone know who you are.
You what?
Let everyone know who you are, Glenn.
I'm Glenn Hardebeck. I manage the Turfgrass Research Center.
Yes, that is one of my big concerns, both from a standpoint of just continuity of, now that we are recording all that kind of formerly analog data in a digital format, making sure that is in a spot that has ability to be passed on to whoever needs to in the future. But also, yes, what you described is, I mean, I have that exact challenge. I found a box that Jim had of floppy disks of yield data from the 90s. And I would love to be able to use that spatial data in some way, and we have nothing that reads a floppy disk. We don't have a program that reads that source of data anymore. So yes, this is like a very real concern that I worry about, that, you know, I think I can delude myself into believing that my the data programs that I'm using now will continue on forever, but that is probably not the case. And so Jarrod and I were talking a little about, you know, what is a good way to start pulling that data from those proprietary formats and getting that into a safe shared folder, something that could be passed on to other people, that is in a format that is not, you know, a green star text file or something like that anymore. Luckily, I mean, there are some universal, particularly for spatial data, like shapefile formats that I guess maybe, again, this is a false assumption, but that I would hope will continue on for, you know, like, seem fairly stable, seem like something that there's not a lot of turnover of, you know, like that is the standard universal format for spatial data. So, I mean, I think some of that will be moving a lot of that spatial data to a shapefile and hopefully coming up with some sort of data storage
Yeah,
where we can do a better job of getting stuff out of these programs now before it's too late, before I'm trying to figure out how do we access this data from the 90s, you know?
yeah. So getting it out of the software also gets it out of that single computer, right? So it has a couple of benefits, and then converting it into, you know, a really common format, or, you know, an open format that has well-defined standards and is going to be around for at least decades. That's definitely something we can do. And then, you know, today versus maybe where we were 10 years ago, you know, just the explosion of like cloud storage is really nice, because you don't have to move it from like floppy disk to floppy disk or external hard drive to external hard drive. You generally can put it in certain places, and they will make sure that everything behind the scenes keeps getting refreshed and your data stays where it was, right? So like per the University repository, things like that. So we're in a pretty good place, but it's still a bit of work.
Can you not use Data Depot to leverage the resources that university already has? And if we have data in those standard formats like CSV for tabular data and shape files for spatial data. So these are, and store them in Data Depot. So that is managed by the RCAC, the High Performance Computing Center. And if there are any like system changes over time, it's on top of that. And I don't think .csv and .shp are going to go away. Even if they change, like it's going to like have a massive impact on a global scale, not like that ag data file format that only you can read with SMS, ag SMS.
Yeah.
So like if you want your data to stay for a long time, storing it in some of the widely used standard formats, and storing it in a platform that is managed by the university. And I mean, it will update it as time goes by, right? So that would be a way to preserve data for a long time and
And we've
also
got,
make it accessible.
we've got Jeff Letner here from the Research Computing Group.
Yeah, I had something to contribute that it wasn't my intention to immediately follow that up, but I'm right here. Yeah, hi, everybody. I come to these from time to time. My name is Jeffrey Lentner. I'm from the Rosen Center. I'm a lead research data scientist on the applications team. So I know all about that stuff in the infrastructure and data depot and data sets and whatnot. Following up from what you said, the thing I love about CSV is like you can't change the notion that you change like that. That's not a concept that makes sense. You
Yeah.
can't change. It is self-discuss that it satisfies fair in the sense that like even if everybody forgot what CSV was, there are people who could deal with that data because it's represented as plain text. You know, I don't necessarily recommend that researchers compute against that format, but it's a fantastic archive format for that purpose. So I'm very much, I love this conversation. What I wanted to ask, I don't know if this counts as like it's not really a hardball question, but what I'd be interested to know is the notion that we're gonna sort of archive all of this in some kind of, you know, data lake kind of a thing with like a annotated catalog that supports discoverability. That all sounds great. And the problem is exactly what you guys are talking about. It's like getting the data out of where it is, right? In the software and the systems that are like the active copy. And I guess I'm wondering how much of the responsibility for the difficulty in doing that isn't really your burden per se, and should be part of the contracts that Purdue gets with technology vendors who are supplying the systems along the lines of, you know, digital rights and the right to repair, and maybe some new right to data that is a requirement of, you know, you know, John Deere or whoever. Can you even get the data out of that in some kind of open format? Because a lot of these companies don't want you to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I would say it's not that difficult to get it out. So from SMS, you can do a batch export of every single file, like every single planting, spraying, scouting, harvest. I can pick what file format if I want it to come out as a shape. You can do that batch export. It will take a long time, but it will do that automatically. Same with if you were using John Deere Ops Center or something like that, I can do a batch export of all that data. I think the real issue then becomes, okay, well, we have all this data in a standardized format, but we now have this issue with data quality. You know, I have fragments of fields, or I have fields that had 2 different yield calibrations that are showing up in the same file, or we have a clean yield data or a raw yield data file. And so we have all this data, but there is a massive amount of contextual information that needs to go along with that data, time that Alex and I or whoever would have to spend annotating that data or going through individual data sets. Like, getting it out, I don't think will be the problem. It's
So
what to
basically,
do with it once we get it out. Yeah.
the integration is really poor. So they have made it such that you can see the data really nicely. It creates maps and everything, and then people don't just want to, you know, this is forgotten when it comes to like actually processing data is probably easier in that thing for one specific purpose, but then it takes like extra energy to do all that Rachel described and have it integrate with some other format that has all of that metadata about the field and operations
So
automatically. It's
some amount of the data is, you know, whether it's just the metadata or the contextual information about the metrics or whatever is lost in doing the export.
It is also just doesn't come along with it, right? That's
Right.
Yeah.
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 So, yeah, to that point, so from John, I was engineering. I do a lot of data collection, both in traditional formats from yield data files, but also collecting our own data for logistics work. And there are 2 points. So a lot of that contextual information just lives in the brain of the person who collected it, and it never gets out. And so as soon as that person, as soon as that data transfers hands, that's lost, unless someone takes the time to go collect it. And even even from our own data, so we talk about this data lake that everybody's gonna be able to get to. I'll be frank, I don't trust my own data lakes. You know, I'm putting stuff in and I'm trying to think back like, oh man, what happened 3 years ago or 5 years ago when we collected that? You know, that's a real challenge. And I'm just curious if you guys have gone through any kind of exercise and it's also a challenge to actually using this data. So we do some machine learning work in our lab too. And so for a machine to understand that, you have that really annotated and structured data, contextual data go along with that, like tech or that main data set. So have you guys looked through and just to see like, okay, these are all the things that could be relevant in a contextual format, like how many like degrees there are that we would have to cover to get everything?
Do you mean like, if we were to try to like write down some of that contextual information, say for a like field where Alex has half of the yield data of this field and the other half is missing or something? Like,
Yeah.
what are all
So
the things that
If
we
you
have
had
to?
if you had a line that was representative of everything that could have happened that we would want to know. And so like right now, you know, a lot of what we do is say notes, when we write in the notes file, like part of that field, you know, blew down in a windstorm or whatever it may be. Like, how many degrees of freedom or lines would you have to cover that so that a machine or a person later could actually go in and quantify that and know what happened?
I don't know.
I,
It could be a lot. Like, I don't know that we.
I don't know you could reasonably do that. I mean, I think you
It would
gotta
be
like
interesting to
start
try to like
smaller and.
talk through a list though of possible options of like, or like go through, like, let's go through 20 of our data sets and try to note like all the different things that we come up with of like, oh, if we were to pass this on for someone, they would need to know this. They would need to see how many buckets we could come up with.
So
I think that'll be-
back next year and, you know, 20 data sets right now.
I mean, I think that's also important, like, part of the challenge we have with unlocking a lot of this precision ag data is like, we want to throw machine learning models and all this other stuff at it. Well, without that data, like, that's dicey. Trying to throw some of that stuff at it that it doesn't understand the contextual data,
Yeah.
just like you showed with the nitrogen prescription information. That's what scares me about some of these automated platforms. Like, I don't know what's going on in that black box to give me that prescription. Like, I don't know what assumptions they're making, and I just have to hope.
Well, and that's a lot of the platforms that farmers are dealing with is it's you have your data goes in and this prescription comes out and you have no knowledge in between of what happened to get to that final prescription. So, I mean, I could get on, this is the soapbox I get on when I teach students about this whole concept of, you know, input and output, particularly for fertility maps. You know, that's this whole issue of data quality that is never addressed by a lot of these platforms.
So I wanted to add that, so if only they were managing like all the data that comes out of PACS or ACRE, I don't know if that would be manageable. So there has to be some kind of like share of responsibility between who is collecting the data, and then there should, like, ideally there would be a way for researchers to enter all of those information, at least standard information, and requirement to upload the data to that common platform. And it fails upload until you submit all of those required metadata. So, and then then everyone who collects data, or like, say, for example, we make that a requirement for students to do that in order to graduate. And you know,
Yeah, I think there's also a question of what's the minimum viable product of some of this too. Like, we know we probably can't capture everything. For instance, if I'm a researcher and I'm going out there and I'm gonna have a yield file, and I might note that there were some oddities or something, but I'm not gonna know. I may not know when I last calibrated that yield monitor. You know, there's some things that I just don't think about writing down. And to your point, Rachel, like, you may not have, like, there may be 1,000 lines that you would have to fill out to have like the most robust data set ever, but really what are the 20 that we need to make it useful?
Our start small, what is, yes, label that minimum viable.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending today. I have a sense that there's a lot of discussion that could be had around this, so maybe we can figure out a way to do that in the future. But for today's presentation and everything, thank you, Rachel, Alex, Dennis, for having us, and everyone for showing up. Appreciate it.
Great discussion.
Is this the after